America's manufacturing comeback just hit a wall, and that wall is made of Chinese graphite. While U.S. leaders were celebrating a factory boom fueled by clean energy, electric vehicles, and chip production, Beijing was preparing something else entirely. A silent, surgical export ban that's now cutting deep into the heart of America's industrial supply chain. The numbers are staggering. Over $300 billion, 0 cents worth of advanced manufacturing now stands at risk, stalled not by politics, but by minerals. No protests, no missiles, just paperwork and a raw material the world forgot to control. And with China producing over 80% of the world's graphite supply, the U.S. now finds itself staring down a single question. How do you build the future when your rival owns the core ingredient? For the past 3 years, U.S. officials have proudly announced a new era of industrial rebirth. Billions of dollars have flowed into semiconductor fabs, EV battery plants, solar panel factories, and rare earth processing hubs, stretching from Arizona to Ohio to Texas. The so-called factory boom was meant to reshape American manufacturing, cut dependence on China, and fuel a cleaner, tech-driven economy. But there's a catch. The U.S. may be rebuilding factories, but it's still importing the materials that power them. In October 2024, China quietly imposed new export licensing rules on synthetic graphite and other key battery-grade materials, essential for everything from EVs to missile systems. Overnight, U.S. companies found themselves locked out of the world's dominant graphite supply chain. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, China controls over 80% of global graphite production, and more than 90% of the purified graphite used in American EV batteries comes directly or indirectly from Chinese sources. Now, with new factories half-built and contracts signed, the U.S. supply chain is exposed, and time is running out. The boom hasn't ended, but without graphite, it may never begin at the scale Washington imagined. In October 2024, Beijing issued what looked like a routine regulatory update. All exports of synthetic and natural graphite would now require government approval. But behind the bland language was a precision strike, one aimed squarely at the heart of the West's clean tech ambitions. China's Ministry of Commerce didn't call it a ban. They framed it as national security protection, but global supply chain analysts understood the message. Overnight, major Chinese graphite producers were ordered to halt outgoing shipments unless explicitly cleared by central authorities. Dozens of U.S. and European buyers reported delayed or canceled orders by November. Papio's print by W.S. Penn. This wasn't a blanket embargo, it was a selective squeeze. Priority was given to China's domestic EV giants like BYD and CATL, while American firms were quietly deprioritized. Even South Korean battery makers, who supply Tesla and Ford, saw shipments rerouted or suspended. The most striking part? There was no press conference, no retaliation narrative, just silence and scarcity. According to the International Energy Agency, graphite is now the single most at-risk component in the EV supply chain. And with new U.S. factories scheduled to come online in 2025, China's graphite control isn't just an inconvenience, it's a chokehold. The numbers are impossible to ignore. According to projections from the U.S. Department of Energy, over $300 billion, 0 cents in clean tech and advanced manufacturing projects are now facing material shortages, delays, or outright cancellations, all tied to one mineral, graphite. The EV sector is the first in line. Tesla's Gigafactory in Texas Ford's Blue Oval Battery Complex and GM's Ultium cell plants are all designed around lithium-ion technologies that rely heavily on purified graphite for anodes. Without it, production halts. Battery assembly lines stall. Vehicle launches get delayed. But it doesn't stop at cars. Semiconductor fabs, particularly those building silicon carbide chips for energy infrastructure, also rely on synthetic graphite during fabrication. So do defense systems, where high-density graphite is used in missile components and stealth materials. Even solar panel manufacturers and grid-scale battery providers are feeling the squeeze. This isn't just a material shortage. It's a cross-sector disruption. Companies that just months ago were breaking ground on factories are now scrambling for suppliers. Some are stockpiling. Others are renegotiating timelines. All are rethinking one brutal reality. You can build factories, hire workers, and print tax credits. But if China controls the core input, you're still not in control. At first glance, graphite seems unremarkable, a dull black mineral most people associate with pencil lead. But in the world of modern manufacturing, it's nothing short of strategic gold. Graphite is essential to lithium-ion batteries, forming the anode that stores and releases energy. Unlike lithium or cobalt, graphite can't easily be substituted. And while natural graphite exists in many parts of the world, China dominates the part that matters most: refining. Over 90% of battery-grade, purified graphite, the kind needed for EVs, defense systems, and grid storage, comes from Chinese facilities. No other country comes close in terms of scale, cost, or output quality. That gives Beijing an outsized influence not just over production, but over timeframes, pricing, and availability. And it's not just about batteries. Graphite is used in steelmaking, nuclear reactors, missile nose cones, and heat-resistant coatings in aerospace. It's the quiet backbone of dozens of strategic sectors. China has spent 2 decades building this dominance, subsidizing its mining sector, vertically integrating its supply chains, and outpricing global competitors. Now, with demand surging worldwide, Beijing is using that leverage with precision. This isn't just about graphite. It's about what happens when one nation controls a keystone resource and knows exactly how valuable it's become. The ripple effects of China's graphite blockade aren't stopping at U.S. borders. Europe, already struggling to meet its green transition goals, has been hit hard. German automakers like Volkswagen and BMW, heavily dependent on Chinese graphite for EV batteries, have begun scaling back production targets. France's Renault paused procurement negotiations with Korean battery suppliers, citing material uncertainty. South Korea and Japan, key exporters of EV batteries to the US and EU, are also exposed. Despite years of trying to diversify supply chains, both nations still rely on Chinese graphite refiners to meet performance specs and cost margins. Some Korean firms are now in emergency talks with the U.S. Department of Energy to secure joint reserves or fast-track alternative deals. India, a rising battery hub, has issued a warning to its domestic industry, advising firms to delay graphite-intensive expansion plans until sourcing is stabilized. Even Canada and Australia, 2 of the world's most promising graphite mining regions, are feeling the pressure. They have the raw ore, but not the refining capacity to step in at scale. This is no longer a bilateral squeeze. It's a global stress test, one that's revealing just how dependent the modern world has become on one nation's control over a black, unglamorous, yet utterly critical mineral. The U.S. saw this coming, but not this fast. For years, Washington has warned about dependence on Chinese minerals. Bills were passed, funds were allocated. But when the graphite ban hit, most of the alternative infrastructure was still on paper. The U.S. currently produces 0 battery-grade graphite at commercial scale. Some mining operations are underway in Alaska and Alabama, but refining, the real bottleneck, remains China's domain. A Department of Energy report in early 2025 admitted that domestic graphite refining may take 3 to 5 years to scale. In response, the Biden administration fast-tracked $1.2 billion, 0 cents, in new grants to companies working on graphite alternatives and synthetic processes. But commercial readiness remains distant. Meanwhile, companies like Tesla and GM are negotiating directly with Mozambique and Tanzania, 2 of the only other nations with sizable graphite reserves. Some policymakers are pushing for a strategic mineral stockpile, similar to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, while others argue for a North American alliance with Canada and Mexico to build shared refining infrastructure. But these are long-term plays. The current crisis is now. And with hundreds of billions at stake, the U.S. must answer a painful question. Can you lead a manufacturing revolution if you don't control the materials that power it? This isn't just a trade disruption, it's a wake-up call. The U.S. has spent billions trying to rebuild its industrial edge: factories, tax credits, worker training, energy hubs. But what China just reminded the world is brutally simple: no material, no manufacturing. The graphite blockade is more than a supply chain hiccup. It's a geopolitical move, quiet, precise, and devastating, and it signals what's coming next. Because if Beijing is willing to cut off graphite, what happens when it targets rare earths, gallium or lithium next? The future isn't just about building more, it's about securing more at the source. Right now, over $300 billion, 0 cents, in U.S. factory investment is at risk of being delayed, derailed, or downsized. Allies are shaken, markets are adjusting, and Washington is scrambling to catch up. The bigger question isn't how did this happen? It's how many more choke points is China willing to use before the world learns how to live without them? Because this isn't just a supply war. It's a warning. And the next critical mineral China cuts off might not leave time to respond.